God dips his love in my heart. Well, I said I wouldn't tell it to a living soul, how he brought salvation and he made me whole. But I found I couldn't find such love Jesus did impart. Cause it made me laugh and it made me cry, and it said my sin was so on fire. When God dips his love in my heart. Sometimes though the way is dreary, dark and cold, and some murmur and sorrow keeps me from the goal, I go to God in prayer. I can always find him there to whisper sweet peace to my soul. Well, I said I wouldn't tell it to a living soul, how he brought salvation and he made me whole. But I found I couldn't find such love Jesus did impart. Cause it made me laugh and it made me cry, then it said my sin was so on fire. When God dips his love in my heart. Every step of Calvary's rugged way to give his life completely and bring a better day. My life was steeped in sin, but in love he took me in. His blood washed away my every stain. Well, I said I wouldn't tell it to a living soul, how he brought salvation and he made me whole. But I couldn't find such love that Jesus did impart. Said my sin was so on fire. When God dips his love in my heart. Well, I said I wouldn't tell it to a living soul, how he brought salvation and he made me whole. But I couldn't find such love Jesus did impart. For he made me laugh and he made me cry, then he said my sin was so on fire. When God dips his love in my heart. Sees a love in my heart.
Thank you, man, for the song. That's very good this morning. And good morning, everyone. It's good to see you in church today. Beautiful morning out there. And I hope everybody's got awake enough that you can enjoy the service this morning. In the book of 1 Samuel, when you get to chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, chapter 15 on through the rest of the book of 1 Samuel is one of the most interesting reads you'll find in the Bible. It's just fascinating. It's a wonderful story to read through there. And by the time you get to chapter 25, where you'll find my text, if you want to open the Bible to chapter 25, and I'll be reading from that chapter in a little while, but I want to kind of bring you up to date. Starting at chapter 15 in this 1 Samuel, we find that God had given Saul, the first king of Israel, he'd given him orders to go out and utterly destroy the Amalekites and not spare anything, not let anything live at all. And Saul went out with his army and came back. When he came back, he had spared the king, Agag. He had spared some of the choicest flock and the sheep and the animals, and brought them back. And when the old prophet Samuel went out to greet him the next morning, Saul said, "Well, bless God, I've carried out, I've done what God told me to do." And Samuel said, "Well, how is it then? I hear the lowing of cattle and the bleating of the sheep." And Saul said, "Well, the people, they wanted to bring back a sacrifice to the Lord." So he blamed the people for his mistake, for him not carrying out the order that God had commanded him to do. And because of that, God told the old prophet, he said, I've rejected Saul as being king. Saul had been king now for 27 years, or about 27 years at this time. And God said, I'm gonna have you, Samuel, to anoint a new king. And so he sent Samuel over to Bethlehem and to Jesse's house, well, actually to the city of Bethlehem, and Jesse's house was called out there to the sacrifice. And when Jesse came, he brought his boys along. Jesse had 8 sons, but he only brought 7 of them to the meeting that day. And when the old prophet got over there and he was looking over the crowd and he saw Jesse's boys, and here was Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, and he looked on down the line at all 7 of the boys, and he didn't see the one that God had impressed him for to anoint as king. God had told him to go and anoint a new king. And finally he said, is this all the boys you got? No, he said, I've got a younger son out there taking care of the sheep. And he said, well, go fetch him. So they brought David in, and when he saw David, then the old prophet, this was the 8th son of Jesse, the youngest son, the old prophet Samuel anointed him to become the next king of Israel. And he's only 17 years old at this time, and he's not going to be king right away. It's going to be another 13 years before he'll be king. Saul has been king for 27 years now, and it'll be another 13 before David becomes the king of Israel. But between that time, the next 13 years are going to be full of excitement and hardship and heartache and disappointment. And you can, if you'll read that from the 15th chapter through the 25th or 26th chapter, you'll find a very interesting read. And it wasn't long after that, you get into the 16th chapter and the 17th chapter, and you're going to find Saul has an evil spirit, and they find a young man to come and play for him. When he comes to play for Saul, the evil spirit leaves, and they found that Jesse's son David was that boy that played the harp, and he was the one chosen to come and play for Saul when he had the evil spirit would trouble him. And then it was by chapter 16, David had evidently gone back home, because he had gone back home now and was back at his father's house when the boys were in the army, and Saul was fighting the Philistines. The Philistines invaded the land, and Saul and his army are out there fighting with the Philistine army, and Jesse, David's father, sent him over to see how his older brothers are getting along in the army, and that's when he encountered the giant. And in that 17 chapters where David realizes the giant is out there defying Israel, and he has been anointed to become the next king of Israel, although he hasn't said anything about that yet. And so he's wondering why this giant is defying Israel, why they're not going out to send a man to fight with this giant. He said, send a man out and fight with me, and if he overcomes me, we'll be servants of Saul. And if I overcome him, you'll be servants of the Philistines. That was quite a challenge, and oftentimes, I guess that was done in those days. They'd send a guy out from each army, and a champion from each army, and whoever won for the whole army. And that's what he's suggesting. And David said, why didn't somebody go out and fight with him? Well, nobody was qualified, so David said he'd do it. And Saul tried to talk him out of it, but he went on anyway and fought the giant and whipped him, killed him with a stone out of his slingshot in the forehead. He let that stone sink in the giant's forehead, and then when the giant fell, he went up and pulled his own sword and cut his head off, and the children of Israel won a great victory. They chased the Philistines all out of the country that day, and what a victory it was. And Saul said, whose kid was this? Whose stripling was this that went out to fight that? Well, they brought David into him, and David had the head of the giant, and Saul then acted like he evidently didn't remember David playing the harp for him before, but he then took a liking to David, and because of what he had done, he sent word to Jesse that he's going to keep David in the army, and then it wasn't long till David's leading the army, and David's taking the army out and bringing them in, and you'll read that just a few pages there, and you'll find the women are out there praising David. They're singing David's praises when he comes in with the army, and they're saying Saul killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s. And Saul got word of God. He got to hearing that, and Saul said, well, they're ascribing more praise to David than they are to me. I'm the king. I'm the one. I'm the commander-in-chief of this army, and David's only the leader of my army, and they're praising him more than they are me. And he got jealous, and he's insanely jealous. And so David is playing for him. An evil spirit come again. David's playing for him, and he's wanting to kill David. He pulls a javelin and he throws it at David, and evidently David's sitting close to the wall, and the javelin misses David and goes into the wall, and David escapes. He got out of there. And as you read these next chapters, you find that David and Jonathan, Saul's son, was really good buddies. They loved each other. Jonathan loved David, and they were good friends, and Saul didn't like that. And then Saul had promised that David would have his daughter to be his wife, and then he gave his first daughter to another man, and now he finally gives the second daughter. He said, David, if you'll go out and get me 100 Philistines and bring them back, you can have my daughter. And David took his men out and killed 200 Philistines, and then Saul finally gave him the daughter to be his wife. But then he tried to kill him again and again. He was hunting after David, and he told his men, he said, I want you to help me to get rid of this guy. And he even told his daughter, and she didn't agree with him at all. And they sent the people up to his room to get him, and she'd let David down through a window, and he escaped. And she put a bolster in the bed and covered it over, and they carried the bed out. And when they went to kill David, they found out it's a dummy in the bed. And so David runs away, and he begins to hide out. And it wasn't long till men began to come to David. In fact, in just a little bit, David had 400 disgruntled men that had come to him, dissatisfied men, dissatisfied with Saul and his army and his men, and they'd come to David. He has 400 to begin with. Later on, he has 600 men with him. But now, David is running from Saul. He's hiding out in caves and in the woods and in the mountains, and as you run through that, I'm just giving you this in a hurry this morning. But David has escaped Saul, and Saul's hunting him like he'd hunt a partridge, like he'd go squirrel hunting or rabbit hunting or pheasant hunting. And he's got his men out there, several thousand men going with Saul out there trying to find David where he's at. They're going to kill him. And that seems to be all Saul's thinking about, getting rid of David. On one occasion, David went over to Nob, and the priest is over there, and he went into and talked to the priest. He was hungry and needed some bread, and the priest said, "Well, I've got some showbread for the priest." And David said, "Well, that'll work." And so he gave him the showbread, and there happened to be a man that David said, "You got any swords?" He said, "I don't have a sword with me." And he happened to have the sword that David had taken off of Goliath and killed him with his own sword. And so he gave David that sword, and David took the showbread, and he took his sword and left. But there happened to be a man there that took care of some of Saul's animals, and he reported it to Saul that David had been seen there, and Saul had killed what I think, if I remember right, it was 85 men of the priesthood that Saul had killed because he had harbored David. And Saul, you can see Saul, such an evil man, through all this as he's hunting David. One time David and his men are in a cave, and Saul came into the cave I'm not sure what he was to do, but he evidently was resting or went to sleep or took a nap or something. And while he was in there, the men said, "David, here's your chance, go down and kill him." David said, God forbid that I would stretch forth mine hand against God's anointed, and David refused to kill him. And but he did go down there and cut a part of his skirt off. And after Saul went out of the cave, David followed him out and called his name and showed him the skirt, or part of the skirt that he'd cut off. And Saul recognizes David is more righteous than he is. He had rewarded him good for evil, and he promised not to hunt him anymore, but that was a false promise that didn't pan out. And David and his men still had to run and hide and stay away and in the hills and out in the woods and out in the caves. And so in all of their experience, they run onto a man by the name of Nabal that had a large flock of sheep and goats and all, and they had taken care of his men during the time they was out there. They'd watched over his men, his shepherds, and kept them safe and looked after them and made friends with them, and so it's a wonderful experience out there. But now, as time goes on, a number of years have gone by now, and David is still hiding and running and just staying away from Saul. On one occasion, he went to battle with his men and rescued one town and the people there. David did a lot of good even while he was running from Saul. He still did good for Israel. But now, the old prophet dies. Samuel dies, and they bury him. And by the time you get to chapter 25, Samuel is dead. Into chapter 24, and Samuel died, and all Israel were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And the title of my message this morning is maybe an unusual title for a sermon, but I remember when we was in one-room country school, a lot of times on Friday evening after recess on Friday, there's not a lot to do, and we pretty well got the weekend. The teacher, oftentimes, if everything was in good order, she would read us a story. And oftentimes she'd read a fairy tale. And I can still remember as a little boy in that one-room country school, that teacher reading to us about Jack and the Beanstalk, about Hansel and Gretel, about some of those fairy tales. And so I've got a fairy tale. Well, actually, it's not a fairy tale. This is a real tale, but it sounds like a fairy tale. This morning, I want to speak to you for a little while today on the subject of Beauty and the Beast. And I think I'll just read some to you, like the teacher used to read to us at the one-room country school. I don't like to read too well because of my bad eye, but I want to read on in this 25th chapter. You sit there and listen like you're the children in the one-room country school this morning for a little bit. I want to read to you. And beginning there at verse 2, and there was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep at Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. And David sent 10 young men, and David said unto the young men, Get you up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus shall you say to him that liveth in prosperity, Peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now the shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there aught missing unto them all the while we were in Carmel. Ask thy young men, and they will show thee. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes, that for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand, unto thy servants and to thy son David. And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David, and ceased. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse, that there be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master? Shall I take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shearers, and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So David's young men turned their way and went again, and came and told David all those things. And David said unto his men, Gird ye every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword. And David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the south. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything, as long as we were convenient with them, or conversant with them, when we were in the fields. They were a wall unto us both by night and day, all the while we were there keeping the sheep. Now therefore no one consider what thou wilt do, for evil is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak unto him or to him. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses. And she said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. And it was so, as she rode on the ass, that she came down by the covert of the hill, and behold, David and his men are come against her. Drop down to verse 23. And when Abigail saw David, she hasted and lighted off her ass, and fell before David on her face, and bowed herself to the ground, and fell at his feet, and said, Upon me, my Lord, upon me this iniquity be. Let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine handmaid. Let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my Lord whom thou didst send. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies and they that seek evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, let it even be given unto the young men that follow my Lord. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord, and evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. Yet a man is risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul, but the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God, and the soul of thine enemies, them that shall he sling out as out of the middle of a sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, shall have anointed thee, appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto the offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood countless, causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have done well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. And David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me, And blessed be the advice, and blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. Verse 35, and David received of her hand that which she had brought him, and said unto her, Go up in peace, and thine house to thine house. See, I have hearkened to thy voice, and have accepted thy person. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he had a feast in his house like the feast of a king, and his heart was merry within him, and he was a very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing less or more until the morning light. But when it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord smote Nabal, that he died. And when David heard that Nabal had died, he said, Blessed be the Lord, that hath pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and hath kept his servant from evil. For the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. And David sent and communed with Abigail to take her to his wife. Now, I don't know how much you got out of the reading of that or not, but I want to share just a little bit with you this morning about Beauty and the Beast, or that's the title of my message, or what title I've given it. And I want to look first of all at this beautiful woman. And in Abigail, we see a picture of a redeemed soul. Abigail means father is joy and cause for delight. That's the meaning of her name. And she was a woman of good understanding. You notice what I've read here, she had good understanding. And the fear of the Lord, of course, is the beginning of wisdom. And she feared the Lord. She loved the Lord with all her heart. And so a woman of good understanding. It also says that she was of a beautiful countenance. It doesn't say she had a Coke bottle figure. It doesn't say she looked like one of the ladies on the cover of the magazine, but she may have been beautiful. I think she probably was a beautiful lady, but it says here she had a beautiful countenance. You know, over the years, all these years that I've been in the ministry, I've seen a lot of homely looking women that were beautiful. To me, they were beautiful. They had a beautiful spirit, a great attitude, and loved the Lord. And that's what makes a person beautiful after all. It's not the features of one's body that makes you beautiful. It's not whether you've got a beautiful figure or not, but beholding the beauty of the Lord, she herself had become beautiful. And in other words, she was easy on the eyes. And she talked constantly about the Lord here in verse 26 through 28. That's all she talked about, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. The Lord kept you from shedding blood. The Lord has promised that He's going to promote you. The Lord is going to see to it that you're going to be a great man. And when you come into whatever God has for you, I think she realized He's going to be the next king of Israel. And she said, when that happens, then you won't regret. If you come down here to shed blood, and that's what David intended to do. He intended to take his men over to Nabal's house, and by morning light there wouldn't be anybody living. He was going to kill them all. He was going to take them out because of the treatment that Nabal had given his young men when they came simply to request some food or something from Nabal to support them or to sustain them while they're out there hiding and running from Saul. But Nabal had shown such a terrible attitude that David decided that he'd take his men over and wipe him out. But here he's meeting with Abigail now. She was humble. Notice in verse 23, 24, and 28 how humble she was. And she took the blame herself. She said, it's my fault. Actually, it wasn't her fault at all. She wasn't even there when the men came. She didn't know they'd come until after they'd come and gone. And one of them happened to tell her that what had happened, that the men had come requesting some food and requesting, and how Nabal had railed on them. And so she did, and she recognized that something bad is going to happen if I don't take care of the situation. So she took the matters in her own hand and got all this food together, and she recognized David's was being persecuted, and she predicted his ultimate victory and gave good advice, and then Abigail asked, she said, remember me, and I want us to look now at this wicked man Nabal for just a few minutes. When we look at see Nabal, look at Nabal, the word Nabal means fool, and a base fellow, a man of folly. That's what his name means. And so he was a man of great possession. It says here he had 3,000 sheep, kind of remind, and 1,000 goats. How'd you like to have that, Tyler? 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Kind of reminds me of Job. Job had 7,000 sheep. He had 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses. He had a very great household. He had 3,000 camels. See, Job had much more than this man, but this man was, by and large, he was a wealthy man to have 3,000 sheep. When I think of that, I was thinking about that this week as I thought about that. I remembered the days when I was a boy working on a farm. The man had 100 head of sheep. And so he asked me and his son one day, he said, do you boys think you could shear those sheep? And I said, sure. I'd seen it done once when I was about 11 years old. I seen a neighbor he had a few sheep, and he had a guy come in there and shear the sheep, and I happened to be over there and watched him one day. Watched him throw those sheep down, and I watched 2 or 3 of them being sheared, and I thought there's nothing to it. He made it look so easy, and so I said, yeah, we can shear them. And he bought an old set of sheep shearers someplace, and they were two-man operation. One man had to crank to keep the shears going, and the other one, while the other sheared the sheep. So his son and I took us a week to shear 100 head of sheep. And I thought this man had 3,000 sheep, and he must have had a lot of shearers there. He must have had a lot of people shearing, and I don't think they had a hand cranked shearer then. I think they had the clippers they sheared by hand. They had those clippers where they just clip and shear those sheep. I've seen those old handheld clippers, and there's something else. But he sheared those 3,000 sheep, and then I don't know what he did with the goats. I guess they didn't have to be sheared, but that was quite an operation he had. So he was a wealthy man, and the man was curlish, it said, and evil in his doings. And in verse 3, and the Bible talks about evil men waxing worse and worse, and we've certainly got it in our day, a lot of evil men. Man was, he was unapproachable, and he was unreasonable. Verse 10 there, it was just impossible to reason with him or talk to the man. He wouldn't, you're not going to reason with this guy. Shall I take my blah, 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 and give it to somebody that I don't even know? And he was just an evil man. A man was selfish. My kind of reminds me of that rich farmer, you know, that Jesus told about. He said, I will pull down my barns and build bigger, and I will lay up much goods for many years. I will say to my soul, you have much good laid up for many years, eat, drink, be. So it kind of reminds me of the rich guy that Jesus told about, the rich barn builder that before the night was over, he went out to meet God. Before the ink got dry on his blueprints, he went out to meet his maker. And here was a man almost the same way. I, me, and my. All he was thinking about was poor old me with all my 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats and all the possession that I've, all the land that I have, and all the hay that I have to make, and all the feed that I have to grind, and all the stuff. And it was just me. I don't have room for anyone else. And the man was selfish, and he liked to drink. In verse 36, when Abigail got home, after she delivered the food to David and brought all that stuff to David, she went home and she found the man drunk. He was drinking. He had a big party and called his men together, and they were just drinking it up. and there he is drunk. And the Bible said, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, whosoever deceived thereby is not wise. So the Bible is clear, crystal clear, in teaching us that it's wrong for us to drink strong drink. And this man was drunk and drunk himself into a stupor, and she decided not to say anything to him till the next day. And so the next morning, after he had sobered up a little bit, she told him about her encounter with David, that she had taken David some food, and what all she'd taken, and how her meeting with David had turned out. And his heart he hardened his heart and turned to a stone. And the Bible said the Lord smote him in verse 38. So payday came, and we can mark it down for sure that whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. Payday always comes. It comes all through the Old Testament. You can read one example after another, and kind of reminds you of Pharaoh. Old Pharaoh down in Egypt wouldn't let the children of Israel go, and he kept hardening his heart. Every time Moses, when Aaron would come to him with a proposition, he'd promise, yeah, and then he'd harden his heart, go back on his word, wouldn't keep his word. And this kind of reminds you, Nabal kind of reminds me of old Pharaoh there. But payday came, and old Pharaoh met his maker, and just as Nabal met his maker, he died 10 days later. His heart had turned to a stone, and then 10 days later he died. And David had been kept from evil. The good gal, Abigail, had said, all she had said was, remember me. And David did a little bit more than remember. When David found out that Nabal was dead, he communed with, the Bible says he communed with her. And I don't know about the communion, what all the communion was. I think maybe he sent word, but one of his men over to Miss Abigail after he learned about Nabal's death, and he said, hey, me and the boys are going to be coming through town Thursday evening. How about meeting me over at Long John's Steakhouse? I got a few things I'd like to talk to you about. Well, it didn't happen that way. It didn't. Because David just sent some of his men over, and he told her that David wanted her to be his wife. And she got 5 of her maidens, and they loaded up some of her things. I kind of read between the lines a little bit. She took 5 of her maidens with her, and she went then to meet David and to become his wife. And in the process of time, the romance was short, but David has his wife now, and she was the mother of Chileab, the second son of David. David had another wife, already had Saul's daughter for wife, but Saul had taken her away and given her to another guy now. And so he didn't have her any longer, but he had a Carmelite that he had taken to be his wife. And so David had 2 wives, and he's still running from Saul. He's still not anointed king, and he's still got to go through some hardships yet. But he's got 600 men with him, along with his 2 wives, and many of their wives are in the group too. And they spend 14 months over at Ziklag before Saul dies. You read on further and you'll find Saul is going to be killed. And after Saul dies, after Saul is dead, David gets word of Saul's death. It's not long till David is king up in Hebron for 7 years. And then after 7 years of being king in Hebron, they make him king over all Israel. And so he was king for 40 years in Israel. But Abigail was the wife of David's. So you can see it pays to do good and to do what's right. And she reaped a great reward in the end. Father in heaven, we read this story, and the story about David and all of his hardships and his wandering and the difficulty that he had, the loss of friends and the hardship that he went through so many years there at the hand of Saul. And we pray today that you'll help us to realize that we too have hardships to face and difficulties in life and things to go through, but not like David, not as hard, but we know that you're there, as you was there to help David, as you guided him through those difficult days, and you helped him in so many ways. We know that you're there to help us, and so will you guide us each day of our life as we face the future. We don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And so help us to live true and be faithful to you, and guide us all the days of our life until we come to the end of the journey. And for all you do for us, we'll bow our heads and praise you in Christ's name. Amen. Well, God bless you. Thank you for being here today. Hope you got a little bit out of the story this morning.